Bodybuilders are driven by photos of the sport's top champions. Older lifters were motivated by the physiques that they saw on magazine covers. Modern coverage of the sport involves daily internet photos of great bodybuilders. I did a similar video about powerlifting, and lifting numbers were a major part in that choice. But bodybuilding is driven by artistic preference. So I went to top competitors, coaches, and experts in the industry and asked what their choice is for bodybuilding's greatest of all time.
That's that's a tough question. There are a lot of phenomenal bodybuilders in the history of the sport, and I would say I've got a top 3, 4, 5 list, that I've always admired and looked up to. I'd say Arnold for sure is definitely at the top, one of the tops. He's a man who not only pioneered the sport of bodybuilding and helped it grow to what it is today, but he kind of set a standard in dedication to the sport and to the mindset of training. And I think it's hard to not put him in that list of one of the greatest of all time. Dorian Yates, no doubt in my mind. Again, another pioneer, phenomenal physique, hard as nails, the muscularity, the thickness, the training intensity. You can't beat that. For me, Mike Francois, not only a mentor to me, but somebody who inspired me as a young bodybuilder to want to be involved with the sport. Unfortunately, because of what he went through, everything got cut short. So I don't think we ever really got to see his true potential and what he was capable of. Kevin Levrone, another one who I think is a phenomenal bodybuilder, amazing shape, amazing muscularity. Just again, I think one thing I think all these guys possess, some more than others, but just the intensity of training in the gym, and that's something that I've always loved and admired.
Hands down, Ronnie Coleman. Before things started to break because of that insane training he was doing, there was no one better relative to size, shape, hardness, you name it. He was the best of the best. It's not even close.
That's a good question. Of course, we had Ronnie Coleman and Lee Haney, those two 8-time Mr. Olympias. But I really like Kevin Levrone. And honestly, his physique, if it weren't for Ronnie Coleman, I think it would have been an easy win for him. He aesthetically, mass everywhere, just perfect proportions. His pose and everything was wonderful. So Kevin Levrone, as far as the old time bodybuilders go. As far as current bodybuilders go, I like Kai Green. Of course, his really eccentric way of posing and his aesthetics, the way he's built, always entertaining to see him pose and do his thing on stage. So I would say those two are kind of my inspiration, or kind of people who I look at.
I would have to say the best bodybuilder of all time. I think the greatest physique-wise would be Ronnie Coleman. He was one of my idols, actually, as I was coming up, and fortunately got to compete many times, finishing second him and then beating him in 2006 to win the title. And I just think his physique pushed all the limitations of what we've ever seen on stage, and as far as conditioning and size and roundness, and that's why I think we can classify him as the greatest. I mean, people look at people like Schwarzenegger or Lee Haney, who also hold number of records of Mr. Olympia wins, but as far as physique and pushing limitations, Ronnie Coleman was definitely someone that really pushed past what we've ever seen before, and probably will not be duplicated in any amount of time soon.
Like my feeling is Arnold Schwarzenegger, because I like that he had the total package. He had the determination, the physique, the dedication, and he started from nothing, and look what he created. So I feel that the whole total package, best Mr. Olympia ever, was Arnold Schwarzenegger.
For me, it came down between Ronnie Coleman and Arnold Schwarzenegger. And at first I was leaning to Ronnie, but then I started to think the greatest of all time, and who had the biggest influence on me to want to pick up a weight in my generation. And I got to go with Arnold. I mean, just from the titles he's won, the physique he brought in a time that people weren't bringing that kind of physique. And then, of course, his personality and the way he did it. And then how he parlayed that into acting, the governor. I mean, if you just look at it, I think even today, kids are still going to see those movies and want to be a bodybuilder. And, you know, you can always say that it was Ronnie because he's the biggest and we may never see that again. And I'm sure people have said that. But for me, the greatest of all time bodybuilder is the guy that put it on the map. And you got to give him his just dues. And for me, the fact he put it on the map, the charisma he had, he did the movie, Pumping Iron. I mean, just all of it together. He's the greatest of all time for me.
That's a real rough one, but I'm going to go with Ronnie Coleman. And the reason I'm going to go with Ronnie Coleman is because the pure mass that he had at 5'11", 286 pounds up on stage, it was just a sight to see him like that. I don't know if we've ever seen anybody quite bigger. We have Rami and some big guys now, but in the condition that Ronnie came in, peeled to the bone, shredded, his crazy work ethic that he put in, and grueling workouts, So that my pick is definitely with Ronnie Coleman.
In my opinion, I believe that Arnold Schwarzenegger is the greatest of all time. I believe that Arnold, epitomized what we do as far as stage presence, as far as building a legacy. For me, bodybuilding is what we do every day. And what we do on stage is just an exhibition of champions. Arnold influences not only the bodybuilding community, but people outside the bodybuilding community, normal people, everyday people, the average American, average people around the world. And that influence is something that I think that we as people should aspire to, mimic and replicate, to enhance the lives of other people. And I believe that Arnold has done that through so many different avenues, coming from bodybuilding, spreading out to acting, politics, and other areas, within the world, and being able to influence other young and up-and-coming entrepreneurs and bodybuilders to also chase excellence and be great.
Oh man, that's a loaded question. Well, if you look at the changing criteria of bodybuilding, you have to say back in the day, of course, it was Arnold. He owned the sport. He defined the sport with the help of Joe Weider. He was the greatest of all time until the new generation. And then, as the criteria began to change and we started pursuing size as one of the primary goals, as size before anything else, I'd give it to Dorian or Ronnie. Jay's a buddy of mine, so I'd have to say he was one of the greatest, of course. But if you look at size and shape and balance and aesthetic, as the pendulum is now swinging back in the other direction. You could say Phil, because he's really balanced and he's got a great degree of symmetry, balance, proportion, and aesthetic for a humongous guy. His physique is incredible, but he doesn't have the tenure yet to be called the greatest, in my opinion. Sorry, Phil. So I'd have to say Dorian's probably my favorite, just because my physique, I think, is more blocky and not as flowing, and so I would relate with Dorian. But I have to say, if you want to give it to anybody, you kind of have to give it to Ronnie the King. He was just a monster for what he did in the time and the era. He had more balance, he had more definition, he had more muscle size. Nobody could touch him, and I was lucky enough to have gone to several Mr. Olympia contests and see him live. Oh my God. And I've seen Phil live and I've seen Jay live, and they're very, very impressive guys. Very impressive. I've seen Dexter and all the top guys. But Ronnie Coleman in his peak, in his heyday, good Lord. I mean, and Dorian too, it gave me that wow factor, but nobody touched that Ronnie Coleman, just good Lord, reaction. I'd have to give it to Ronnie the King.
To me, it's Dorian Yates, and here's why. I mean, there's phenomenal people today. I mean, Phil Heath, the current crop of bodybuilders today is phenomenal, don't get me wrong. It's just, to me, Dorian exhibited the greatest amount of mass, density, and dry conditioning. And actually, ironically, with Dorian, he was actually very symmetrical as well. People would say, oh, he's blocky, this and that. But every Olympia, he actually won the symmetry round, just to keep things in perspective. I just think back then he was so far ahead of his time. And even today, guys that have a very round look, Phil and these guys, But I think Dorian, with that look and density, I just think it would just be fascinating to see him today against the top guys, the top fighting Olympia. It really would be fascinating.